So, hello everybody. Nice to have you all here this afternoon for this webinar on Gender Lens initiative in Switzerland. Today we have three amazing panelists. Maybe few explanation on SFG because the GLIS is a working group of SFG. So my name is Sandrine Salerno. I'm the director of SFG, and then I will give the floor to Tim Raji, who is also a member of the board of SFG. Maybe a few words on SFG. SFG is an association who is dedicated on sustainable finance. Actually, it's the first association in Switzerland born 13 years ago on sustainable finance, when at that time sustainable finance was a very niche approach. In this webinar, we're going to talk about finance and gender. We're going to talk about certification, data, all those very important issues that can help us to imagine new assets that have a gender lens approach. And I'm going to give the floor to Tim Raji, member of the board. Maybe a few words before leaving you. I remember that we have a big event called Building Bridges at the end of this month, starting 29th of November with a summit, and then 3 days of event, workshop on sustainable finance in Geneva. And if you're not in Geneva but you're interested, you can visit the website buildingbridges.org, and you can also follow the summit because it's going to be a live stream. So thank you everyone for being present this afternoon, and I leave the floor to Tim Raji.
Thank you so much, Sandrine, and it's great for this initiative to be supported by Sustainable Finance Geneva, because it was really a pioneer in Switzerland, the first institution of its kind dedicated to sustainable finance. And it's also one of the best bridges between the private sector and the public sector, as we have both across the shores of Lake Geneva. So welcome to this webinar on the EDGE certification process. We're very fortunate to have with us a representative of EDGE, David Pritchett, and also two partners of EDGE, represented in the case of IFC by Laila El Rifai, and in the case of Pictet Group by Karine Genevet. Thank you to the three of you for making the time today to explain how you've worked together to achieve certification related to gender lens investing considerations. The Gender Lens Initiative for Switzerland was launched in March of 2021, so it's a very recent and fresh initiative. The idea is to enhance the contribution of Switzerland to SFG number 5, which promotes women empowerment and autonomy and gender equality. And we do that in different ways. We have an academic research committee that is about to produce and launch its first industry report. It's also designed a number of research efforts that will be launched progressively over the next few months. We have an investment solutions committee that screens investment products from a gender lens perspective and then showcases those that deserve the title to an increasing group of institutional investors. We are collaborating with a number of industry standards, of which I think we can say very safely that EDGE is one. And an important one. And then, of course, we have the events where we try to convene and educate a broader range of financial industry stakeholders. The next one being, as Sandrine mentioned, Building Bridges, the week of the 29th. We will have a GLIS event on the morning of Tuesday, the 30th of November at Hotel Warwick. You can register for that event through the website www.buildingbridges.org. And we will have a networking cocktail that evening in a downtown location. So without further ado, I'll pass the words to David. David, maybe before we get into EDGE itself, if you could tell us a little bit about your personal journey and what led you to this role and organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Sandrine. Very happy to be on the webinar this afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining. I will be able to shortly introduce the EDGE certification and assessment solution and demystify some of the aspects behind the assessment and the solution itself. And to be joined by two co-presenters working for organizations that are very close to us and had strong experiences and track records in working with the EDGE solution. Personally, I'm acting as the managing director of the EDGE Certified Foundation. My own background is primarily in sustainability consulting, where I worked 20 years at one of the big four organizations and another sustainability consulting organization, an international one, working primarily with corporate clients on advisory and assurance type solutions within the sustainability area. So very much looking at sustainability on a macro level, looking at the different areas which can help performance improvement for organizations, very practical solutions to accelerate progress in sustainability. And now, since 2019, so the last 2 years, I've been an EDGE certification. Really happy to dive more deeply into one of the themes which inspires me very, very strongly in terms of equality, and to work on this very issue-specific solution topic. So that's a little bit my route, I guess, into the EDGE solution. EDGE itself, perhaps I'll carry on now just with a short introduction of EDGE before I get into the slides. So EDGE itself was founded in 2009 as a Swiss foundation with a vision to create a world of equal opportunities for men and women. It developed, as many of you will be aware, a standardized methodology and a global certification system that can be applied across industries, regions, different legal entities for assessing and tracking progress in closing the gender gap. So since the first pilot organizations took place, and some of those were in Switzerland in 2013, we're now counting on 200 plus certified organizations in 44 countries. And before launching into the slide and telling you a little bit more about the structure and the way that the EDGE certification is made up and what kinds of areas we focus on in the assessment, I think it's important to take a step back and think, why is the EDGE solution a key one or a relevant one from a gender lens investing perspective or a sustainability investing perspective? For me, there's three key reasons which align us and which I often evoke in conversations with sustainability investors, ESG investors. One is that the EDGE solution addresses very directly front on some of the key criticisms of ESG data and ESG investment landscape. So the availability of the data in this space, which is not always easy to come by. EDGE, based on the solution that we have, ensures that there's availability of data for all of the organizations who are going through the EDGE certification. The consistency and comparability of the data, because we have the standardized methodology and we are using standardized metrics, we do ensure that the companies that are EDGE certified have gone through a consistent and comparable set of processes and procedures, etc., and therefore can be benchmarked against each other. Finally, the third-party verified data. Now, this is something which obviously gives credibility to a lot of the ESG investment decisions, and having ESG investors who can depend on credible, independent third-party data really does enhance the value of that data from our perspective in investors' eyes. It's also a system which ensures accountability from the organization to take action to accelerate progress on the gender equity journey. So more than just pure disclosure in some of the corporate sustainability reports, whereby some of the investors will be looking at disclosure metrics, the EDGE certified organizations will be able to show accountability for actually setting targets and following on those targets and action plan in the future. So those areas are, for me, really important to look at from an ESG investing perspective. Another one is that the EDGE is addressing materiality and material issues relevant to driving gender equality within the organizations that we work with. We do have a process and a mechanism to ensure that we are addressing the gender-related issues which are material to the organizations that we have. So this again, in the trend of materiality, and this is something which is being picked up in the regulations from the SEC and the EU, etc. We are having this as a foundation principle for the types of metrics that EDGE is putting our organisations through on their route to certification. And finally, obviously, the impact of the EDGE solution. ESG investors and the ESG community is obviously very focused on impact. It's something that you hear a lot. It does support better risk management. Obviously, you've seen in the literature organisations such as McKinsey proposing that leaders in gender equality, or those with a high number or a better gender balance at the top of the organisation, see lower cost of capital. For us, EDGE, we believe the EDGE solution and going through the EDGE solution supports operational risk management. So it empowers companies with knowledge of their underlying factors which drive a specific dynamic within their pipeline, so that they can manage it from an operational risk perspective and really identify the gaps that they have, so they can take actions to make a difference. We're aligned to the regulations. The Swiss equal pay regulation, for example, our unexplained gender gap methodology is aligned there. So we do help compliance with regulation in various countries. We support the economic development case. Obviously, Laila will talk a little bit about this from the IFC. It's very close to the work that they're doing to really work in emerging markets and to align the EDGE solution with economic development and economic progress from a World Bank perspective. So these are some of the sort of contextual aspects which we often come across in conversation with the investment community, and I just wanted to sort of bring those up at the start so that we can have those to frame the discussion, what we're looking at. And now what I'll do is I'll go into a little bit more depth in terms of what is EDGE about and what do we actually look at. So on this slide that's showing now, you'll see that we present EDGE as a leading software as a service solution. It is, what we're doing is providing access to a software to our clients for them to measure, accelerate, and get certified for where they stand in gender and in intersectional equity, which I'll come on to later on. It's very much a social tech sort of organization that gives the organizations the power with which to transform their workplaces. And then this is repeated on a biennial basis. So every 2 years, the companies becoming EDGE certified will go through this process. On the next slide, I talk about the 4 pillars which support the assessment, the EDGE assessment. 2 of these are quantitative or outcome-oriented pillars. So the first 2 that you see on the screen there. The 3rd and the 4th ones are qualitative or more process-based pillars. Measuring gender representation, something that companies tend to do at the board level and often at the senior management level. What we're doing here is measuring the gender representation so we can understand gender equality along the talent pipeline, also in a dynamic sense. So we're requesting that our companies go through assessment of their hiring and their promotion and their retention practices at different levels of hierarchy within the organization, so they can understand the sense of the dynamic flows of the gender equality throughout their organization over time. By doing this, they can forecast where their organizations will be potentially situated within 3 to 5 years by forecasting the status of where they are in the gender representation numbers. What we're doing in pillar 2, in the pay equity pillar, is that we're measuring, obviously, if all things being equal, are men and women paid the same in terms of salary and pay within an organization? The EDGE methodology requires a linear regression analysis to do this. We use acceptable variables that influence pay. They are aligned to what the Swiss government are seeing as the standard variable. So our EDGE pay tool is one of the tools which has been validated scientifically and legally for use alongside to be compliant with the Swiss equal pay laws at the moment. Now, looking at the process ones, equally as important. None of these 4 pillars are weighted any higher than any other. So the process ones are equally weighted. The effectiveness of policies and practices. we look at. And this doesn't mean just purely the existence of policies and practices in different areas or drivers of gender equality. It's also the implementation of those. And we run this through a dedicated questionnaire to understand where companies are at with regard to the implementation of those policies. And in terms of inclusiveness, the fourth pillar, this is reflected in employees' experiences. So we believe that this has a direct impact, obviously, on the level of engagement of employees and how they speak about their employer. So what we do is we require organizations to run an employee survey around to gain their perceptions around the behavior and the culture of the organization with gender equality. And organizations with these four pillars, they can be benchmarked across their performance, which is quite a valuable outcome that they perceive. So what, in terms of the data, that's the four pillars, if you like. On the reverse side of the four pillars, what we're doing is, on the next slide, collecting information from three sources. We're collecting statistics. So we're collecting statistics which are disaggregated by gender and by level of responsibility in a series of different areas. So there's 11 data tables for organizations to complete, very, very broad in terms of the type of information we're covering, ranging from pure numbers in different levels and hierarchies, numbers of promotions, etc. But also we look at areas such as leadership development, training programs, we look at mentoring, we look at levels of responsibility, and such, and so on and so forth. We look at the infrastructure, as I told you, just back to the previous slide. We look at the infrastructure. So we're looking at the policies and practices, and we're looking at the employee survey. So with these three sources, what we're doing is we're triangulating the assessment, if you like, to help an organization to develop a very tangible, impactful action plan from which to go forward. Now, with the assessment, they get an essence of where their strengths and weaknesses are, what are the underlying factors which drive a specific dynamic, and by triangulating the results of these three sources of information, we really enable the organization to put in place a powerful action plan which can really make a difference and transform their organization over time. The next slide looks at a little bit our footprint, as I talked about in the introduction. Now we started off with the first organization in 2013, and now we're at 200 plus organizations, which are across 44 countries. But interestingly, I think to point out here is that then we're not just looking at the multinational organizations who are the subject of obviously pressure from ESG investors, etc., and some of the ESG indexes. We're also certifying NGOs, we're certifying organizations such as the IFC and the World Bank, multilateral development banks, and some central banks, for example, a lot of financial services organizations. So it's very broad, and the methodology is very relevant for organizations across different sectors and across different geographies. Perhaps the next slide, shortly, a couple more slides just to sum up the solution. And I'm sure what I'll do is I'll stop after that and give you a chance to ask questions later on in the Q&A. There's three levels of certification. This you may be aware of for those of you who are familiar with EDGE, because what we do is we've designed a process to try to meet organizations where they are with regard to their maturity and their performance on a gender equality basis. We appreciate and we recognize the commitment of organizations in the assess level, and then monitor progress, obviously, where clients are able to reach the move level, and where some leading organizations show a broad, strong performance across all of the different variables of gender equality in the EDGE system. Now, it's not, there's no barriers to entry to the EDGE system, if you like, as long as there's no legal non-compliances to the organization in this space. We are inclusive, and we include organizations at the assess level if they go through diligently the whole process that I've just outlined with the four different pillars and the three different sources of information. And we like them to start their journey, obviously. We do want to keep accountability, though, for progress. And the way that we do that is that the organizations will need to progress from one level to another within 6 years, so within 3 certification cycles. Otherwise they will need to fall out and then start back again. So what we don't want to do is to attract organizations who are just looking for a seal of approval and a stamp on their websites to say that they're gender equal, but actually don't anticipate to take any measures to accelerate progress. So this gives that opportunity for those who really do want to make a difference to stay in the system and to benefit from that. Just a short word on the next slide in terms of connecting to the different ESG capital market players. I think this is a little bit the basis of this webinar also, to look at that. I think it's very, very important, and the movement at the moment with the gender lens investing and some of the articles that have been coming out in this space, and a lot of them are on the SFG Gender Lens Initiative portal, and it's worthwhile reading. It's great to see the alignment and build connection with some of these capital market players. It's great to see the integration of some of the initiatives. I mean, what we want to do is to help give credibility for the data with our solution. What we're doing is EDGE is a scoring criteria for all of these different players. They're slightly different in the way that they're set up and the way they play. I mean, S&P Global, as you know, is the organization which does the research behind the Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes. Very highly reputed, over 20 years of history in assessing sustainability performance. We work with them very closely to ensure the relevance of the questions that they're asking in gender equality as a whole, in their labour practice indicators section, and sometimes in their governance section. It's very exciting, the direction that they're taking. They're now looking at intersectionality in their questionnaire. They have done this year, which those of you who've responded to that questionnaire would have seen. With Bloomberg and Equality, obviously Bloomberg do the research behind their own index. They have a scoring question in their questionnaire, which is whether or not organizations are EDGE certified, because they recognize that it's good practice for an organization to be EDGE certified, and this will give them comfort, obviously, that there's a certain amount of rigor with the metrics that they're undertaking in gender equality. And the same with Equileap. They've got some great analysis going on, very centered on one theme, and they're doing some really good, solid analysis and research. And obviously they also are interested in the organizations that are EDGE certified as well, because it gives them the opportunity to understand the credibility of the audited data, because they're not auditing themselves any data. So a lot of scope, I think, to build some coherence, some consistency, some comparability between the different players and the types of information that the ESG players are actually getting access to and building decisions on for their asset management, etc., and some of their guidance for the topics that they're having. Some are obviously building products, investing, and others are maybe driving engagement, stewardship conversations with their organization. So it's good to have some consistency and cohesion around what are the material topics that they should be asking some of the organizations. And finally, one final slide I did want to mention today is on the fact that EDGE is expanding beyond gender to include the intersectionality with additional dimensions of diversity. It's something that we've seen that companies in some geographies are beginning to gather data with regard to other areas of diversity. Now, obviously, in some it's forbidden, not allowed to from a legal basis, but in other jurisdictions, companies are starting to collect this. And once they start collecting this, it will be good to also look from an assessment perspective and see where there may be some themes that could be better, data could be better managed and performance could be better managed. So watch this space. I think if you are coming to the Building Bridges event in Geneva later this month, our co-founder may well talk about this a little bit more and introduce some of our plans for 2022. But I will leave you there and hand over to the co-presenters. Go straight to Laila, I think, at the IFC.
Thank you so much, David. Hi, my name is Laila Ereferi. and I am a Gender and Economic Inclusion Officer at IFC. I work very frequently with the EDGE product. IFC, I just wanted to introduce IFC. So IFC is the largest global development institution focused on supporting the private sector in developing countries. We are a member of the World Bank Group, so we are the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We are owned by 184 member countries, and we have worked across 6 decades so far, providing loans, equity, and advisory services to private sector companies in the emerging market. Our global presence is in more than 100 countries, and we're working with over 2,000 private sector clients around the world. So this is just a short introduction of IFC. EDGE is one of our favorite products when it comes to women's employment around the world. First of all, I wanted to say that IFC itself is EDGE certified. The World Bank Group is EDGE certified. And we really like to put our money where our mouth is. So we did not just get certified. We are also supporting our clients around the world to get the EDGE certification. I have worked so far with 6 clients in the Middle East and North Africa to receive this certification. 2 of them are already certified, 4 to go. And there's many more around the world. This is just in this small part of the world. We are seeing huge demand from our clients when it comes to EDGE, but EDGE is not a product that we offer to every client of IFC because of the rigorous methodology and because of the requirements to get certified. It's not easy to get certified. The certification is an incentive to do more on gender, but it is also a learning experience for companies. So in order for a company, for example, the certification itself requires the company to work with its HR data, have solid HR data, and also run a staff survey, know exactly what policies and practices they have in place. We have found that this is definitely not an easy process for companies. So it is a learning experience, not just to have the data, but to also be able to extract the data in a way that makes sense in order to lead to data-driven decision-making. And this is what EDGE is about. In EDGE, data is king. Why am I saying it is an incentive to do more? Because once companies are certified, it is not just a stamp of approval. There's an action plan that comes with EDGE, and companies work on implementing this action plan to be able to recertify again, and they're usually looking to move up the certification ladder. So if they're certified at level 1, they want to be certified. If they're at SS, they want to move to EDGE Move, for example. So they want to improve. And this is why I'm saying it's also the first step. So why are we seeing high demand and interest from companies? First of all, EDGE is a great benchmarking tool. When you are a company working in Egypt, or when you're a company working in Morocco and working with IFC, you are probably the best in your market. However, being the best in your market for these companies does not mean anything, because they want to be compared to international companies in their sector as well. So the idea of benchmarking in EDGE is very interesting for these companies, and they want that. They want to see how they compare to companies in their sector around the world. So this is the first thing. Second thing is we are seeing high demand from investors and stakeholders in these companies for them to get such certifications and become more inclusive. We have some companies were referred to us, for example, by VCs. So there's really high demand there. Or some companies are saying, well, we're listing in the stock exchange and we want to really show that we are more inclusive. And the last thing, of course, it is for the companies themselves. They want to go the extra mile when it comes to being gender diverse, because at the end of the day, gender diversity really makes business sense for them. They realize with all the data coming out about the importance of gender diversity and the business case for the gender diversity, that they can't work in a silo anymore, and really being gender diverse is what makes business sense for them. Just to wrap up, I just want to say that we're very happy to be here today, very happy to speak on behalf of my clients. And in terms of IFC, we're in the business of creating markets, but we think of it as creating markets for all, not just giving a loan to a company, or not just buying equity in a company, but really trying to have an impact on everyone in the market and on employees in the companies. So this really, we feel that this really makes an impact in the companies we work in and in the markets we work in. Thanks.
Thank you, Laila.
Wonderful, thank you. Go ahead, Carrie, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tim, sorry. Thank you, Laila, and thank you, David. It's a great pleasure. Good afternoon to everybody on the line. Great pleasure to be here and to share and exchange on this wonderful topic today. Just maybe on the next slide, if we can go, Arlette, please, a little bit of an introduction where I wanted, because it's also, Sustainable Finance Geneva, I give a sense of the context for us on EDGE, on gender diversity, and then we'll see the micro picture a bit later. But you might know, so maybe just a quick word of introduction on me. My name is Corinne. I'm the group head of diversity and inclusion at PICTE. And you know that at PICTE we believe in responsibility. This is one of the cornerstone of our culture. We define, in fact, ourselves as responsible investor and responsible employer. As responsible investor, we believe that investing is the underwriting of a particular vision of the world, the underwriting of a particular vision of the world, and I invite you to think about that. And that's, when we invest, we in fact embrace and take responsibility for much more than just the financial performance. And this is why, of course, we integrate environmental, social, governance criteria to our investment process on top of the usual financial metrics. But really, you see that by reestablishing the holistic meaning of performance, so performance to all its dimensions, this is how we express our responsibility, and we believe we work towards a more responsible future. Well, we in fact have a very similar approach when it comes to building and nurturing our organization. So you all know, and David, you referred to it, and Laila too, there is abundant research on the fact that diversity has a positive correlation with lower cost of capital, you mentioned, David, superior financial returns, higher profitability, innovation, improved access, market access, you mentioned, Laila. And this is all great, and we rejoice at that. But beyond the economic benefits of diversity, we embrace and we wish to embrace a broader definition of performance, which includes human dignity and equity. And this is why gender diversity in particular is an important topic. On the next slide, just why EDGE? So now we're diving into the topic of gender diversity and how we started. So we were, in fact, we did the first certification in 2019. David, I think you gave the good spin on what is level 1, and that's when we got level 1, and it was more of a déclaration d'intention, an expression of commitment, as you say, David, wanted to walk the path, and maybe going from a structure which was more intuitive to something which was very framework driven, and this is what EDGE gave us. I want to maybe also say that Of course, we're very proud to be now, we certified very recently at level 2 and we put it on our website, but this was not the main reason. There was not to attract new talents. We're happy if it can do that, but it was really for us to understand how to walk that journey, you know, and it's a bit blurry at the beginning if you've not done it. So it was very important for us to have something very structured that guide us. And EDGE has been that charter, very solid framework. So you can cut and dice, you know, all the little areas that you need to approach and then go one by one to see where you stand on each and then start working the path. And I have to say that our experience with EDGE, which was very positive, has been not just on the final stage, you know, the audit certification, but in fact the previous year and a half of, you know, conversations and guidance on what was easiest for us to approach and with which route, you know. So that's how we've been able to progress. And I think we feel proud of level 2 because of that, because we feel it is an acknowledgement of the progress that we've made. But data was a very big part of that, so definitely the credibility of the framework and the structure that it brought to us. We had a lot of data, but now we actually have live dashboards on women representation in the firm. They are accessible to all our business leaders. Live dashboard, you can cut and dice by division, department, jurisdiction, you know, department, sub-department, everything. So, you know, all of this actually talks to a lot of our business leaders. Transparency was also an important point, and we actually conducted live webinars with EDGE, together with EDGE, to explain not only the methodology, but also what it meant. So for the first time, we actually showed the women representation by management level to all our employees. You know, we say, this is what it is, what pay equity means, and we were complying with that, so we were also happy to share and explain the difference between gender pay gap and pay equity. You know, those are blurry things for many people. One very interesting thing was the question that we had by EDGE on boards, you know, on the woman representation on boards. And we're not listed, as you might know, so it's not like people, you know, go and dive in. And we've been building the organization, a lot of the boards, I didn't even know them, but, you know, for EDGE, we looked at the data and it created a very interesting conversation with our managing partners. You know, how do we look at women representation in our boards? And we've created a project out of that, and it was, you know, it was triggered by that question. So there's a lot more than, you know, maybe just the broad picture that you see of EDGE, but for us it was really a good way to challenge ourselves and become accountable also to our employees, right? Because when you go in front of them, show them the numbers, they'll ask again, you know, so we come back regularly to them. The each survey was a great thing for that. You know, this is the one thing that you don't control. The employees reply, you know, they judge the culture. So super interesting. Benchmarking, Laila, you already talked about it, but of course it is an important thing. You know, this is what we do day to day in our business. We benchmark ourselves, you know, performance is benchmarks. So it was interesting, you know, this exercise, at least in the financial industry, is something that works very well for our business leaders. Talk about benchmarking, people are really attentive, and it helps us actually understand our ambition and express it both internally and externally, and we now have a vocal ambition to reach 30% women representation at all management level. So I won't go on benchmarking because Laila, I think you spoke very elegantly about that, but this is a bit of an overview of that. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. But I would like maybe on the next slide to give you a bigger picture on diversity and inclusion, because gender is just one part of it on the next slide. And there's so much, you know, conversation on diversity and inclusion, and I think it would be unfair. What we've discovered, and I think Ed was also part of the discovery, is that we can't stop the conversation at gender, and that we need to expand it. So I thought I would just share with you, in case it can be useful, a bit of our vision on how we do that. So first of all, inclusion is for all. Inclusion is for all employees. The goal of inclusion is to create a culture that is safe, open, with a strong sense of belonging, but really safe, fair, a fair culture. We come back to that. Within all of this, you know, that you want to be fair for all employees, you also want to be fair for some minorities, for the minorities, right? And we've chosen 6, we call them diversity chapters, to focus on. So women, disability, ethnicity, LGBT, generations, but young and senior talents, and socioeconomic background. But really, our diversity and inclusion efforts are aimed at all employees. And you can see on the next slide, I will show you what the little framework we put together. So on inclusion, we follow the Korn Ferry framework. This is not mine. We look at structural inclusion, which is really all of our HR processes. So how do you recruit people? Is that fair? You know, we had the question from Edge. What is your promotion criteria? What does it take to get to the next level? What is the promotion process? I can tell you, if you talk to employees about that, it speaks to everybody. You don't need to be a minority, right? It speaks to everybody. What does it take to get promoted? What does it get to get, you know, to the next level, to get more responsibility? The answer is structural inclusion, a fair culture for everybody, and behavioral inclusion. And then on diversity, what we did is we created a little framework of a few dimensions to address. So comply, risk mitigation, accept and acknowledge minorities, accept, you know, explicitly acknowledge the minorities exist, support them, i.e. really proactively address the potential obstacles, and then, you know, potentially when you can look at KPI monitoring, which means you would have data, right? Which we do in gender. And on the next slide, I will show you how, again, in case it can be useful, we're happy to share here the little framework that we've put together around that. On the next slide, it puts everything together. Oh, maybe it's stuck. Anyway, so it was just to show you how it all comes together. On the next slide. Oh, it's stuck. Oh, here it is. So this is how it all comes together. You see engagement dimensions, inclusion dimension. Structural inclusion is the three first. Policies, management commitment, so onboarding of business leaders, career development support. This is structural inclusion. And you see how it all comes very, you know, together. So we do that for each diversity chapter. And, you know, Edge is one of the reasons why we put all this together, and you can actually put every single question of Edge audit in these little boxes. But we do that for gender, and we look at every diversity chapter through this lens. It gives you a very good route of how we go. So that comes back to Edge, you know, this is one of the things that it pushed us to do. And maybe to come back to the bigger view, on the last slide, I will tell you about what we think is the end game on gender, but also on other chapters. And it's beyond, but it comes back again to responsibilities that the end game is allyship, is what I call responsible employee. So it's not, you cannot be a bystander anymore. We want to onboard everybody on the journey. You can be a privileged person in a particular context. You can be an underprivileged person in a different context. You need to be an ally at all times. So this is what we really want to have an end game. It's not a game where we only look at only a certain part of the population, but we want everybody to be onboarded and create this this notion of allyship for a better culture, a better inclusive culture. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karine and Leila and David, for this very comprehensive overview, and yet very much to the point on Edge and how to implement it in different types of organizations. I had a couple of questions for you, perhaps related to how complicated is it to step up, to step on board and get this first assessment from Edge. How much time does it take? How much money does it cost, if we have numbers, for organizations like PICTA and the IFC? And David also mentioned that Edge was designed to apply to all, a broader range of organizations, both in terms of scale and also different types of markets. Maybe you could speak to extreme cases, both big and small, of organizations that have been certified. But first, if we could talk about the length of time it takes to get onboarded and how much it would cost.
I can speak to how much time and effort it takes, because I experience that every day. That's my full-time job. Companies take a very long time to be able to get the Edge criteria right. This is what I'm seeing here in the region. It should take them maximum a year to get audited to become Edge certified. And what I'm seeing is that they're barely making that year with a lot of support from IFC, just because, first of all, the beauty of the Edge methodology, but in the same time, the difficult thing about it is that it's a very rigorous methodology that has very, very clear standards and data points that every company needs to abide by in order for them to be able to benchmark companies around the world, right? So the survey that runs in a company in Egypt is the same survey that runs in a company in Germany, is the same survey that runs in a company in Pakistan. So everybody, and the same data points that are collected in each company are the same. So many companies, we find out, have the data, but are not able to extract it properly. And that's it. So we keep going back and forth on the data for a very long time until companies get it right. The second thing that takes a long time is getting this survey right. Because also this is part of the beauty of the EDGE methodology, is that the survey needs to reach all employees in the company. So the first response I get from companies when I say that is, like, everyone? I say, yes, everyone. And mostly when companies run surveys, what we're seeing is that they don't reach everyone. So they say, okay, 30% of the company this survey will reach 30% of the company. So when we say 100%, they're shocked. So we need to really come up with plans that are well put together in how the companies are going to reach their employees with the survey, whether paper surveys, online closed links, online open links, etc., and how it's going to run. So this all takes a lot of time and effort, and it takes companies a while to really master the system. So yeah, that's the effort and time. I'd leave the money to David.
No, it's interesting to hear your perspectives from the emerging markets, Leila. I think that's very insightful. Tim, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to ask if companies had to hire dedicated people and create new roles for to be able to answer.
No, so just to put into some sort of numbers into perspective, the average amount of time that it takes an organization to get ready for the audit is, on a global basis with the 200 plus organizations, because we monitor this on our timeline, is 3.5 months. And the average amount of time that it takes to get from the initial contracting to the actual certification granted is approximately 5 months on a global basis from all companies. I mean, some have done it, fast track this within a couple of months because they go through a recertification. And in a recertification situation, they will have their systems and their processes and the data ready because they've already been through this in one series, and they're familiar with the way that it's worked. So that gives you a sense of the time it takes. Obviously, it depends on the robustness of the systems and the availability of the different team members to be able to dedicate to this. I know the IFC in the emerging markets that they're working in, they're often very fragmented organizations geographically, and maybe the robustness of the system sometimes are emerging or developing, and the IFC team has had more difficulty to get access to all the employees and to gather the information. Hence, for some of those organizations in the MENA region and also in Southeast Asia, it's taken a little bit longer than average to actually run this process. But then again, I mean, the first wave of this process has maybe taken that, and then the second one would then be much more, would be much shorter. And I think the value is in that, in the work that you're able to do with them in the course of that process. The system is for all organizations of 150 plus employees. As you can understand from the 4 pillars that I went through, and the statistical data that's required, the policies and practices, and the employee survey, the meaningfulness of the response, the meaningfulness of the outcomes can only really be felt for organizations of 150 plus employees, because we are slicing and dicing the data, as Karin said, at different levels of hierarchy within the organization across different job types. So we're also looking at different types of functions within the organization, those with core functions, those with support functions, and those with profit and loss responsibility, to really dissect the organization to understand the intricacies of the talent pipeline. So to be able to have enough data from a critical mass perspective, 150 plus is recommended. Now the largest organization we certified was Capgemini in India. I think they had over 100,000 employees. That worked well. 100,000 employees were invited to participate in the survey. Obviously, our response rate requirement is 30%, so only 30% of those have to respond to be eligible to be certified. But that was the largest, I think, that we've done. The small, well, just to give you a sense, the most recent certification we did was with the Union Cyclisme International, I think, Union Cycliste International in the Canton Valais. They have approximately 150 employees, and they've just gone through a recertification. So again, very meaningful for them to look at this from an organizational perspective and how they're actually on their journey towards gender equality. And they've also, similarly to PICTE, been able to reach the MOVE level of certification of their first recertification, which is excellent achievement for where they started from. So the size is very different, but 150 plus, and it's open. The cost is dependent on the number of employees and the amount of data. As you can imagine, it's very dependent. We have a fixed scale rates which are internationally relevant, so there's no difference in pricing across regions. It's purely based on the headcount, because that's what drives the amount of effort on the Edge side to prepare an organization for certification. The audit itself is undertaken by one of 3 certification partners who are accredited to do the audit, and that's a separate fee, which was undertaken to keep the independence, because what Edge is not doing, we're not checking the accuracy and completeness of the data. We're helping organizations to, as Karen very well put out, with these structures to really bring the right meaningful data and to be able to manage those and put targets on those. And the auditors themselves are then going to check the accuracy and completeness of that, which gives that level of credibility. But I mean, for a pricing quote, you'd have to come to us. We're not divulging the pricing on publicly, but it's for the amount of effort that goes into it and the amount of time that you get from Edge to which represents that journey. I mean, coming from a Big Four organization, I can tell you it's about a quarter of the cost of what a Big Four organization would probably charge for the same thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, David. And I think that your pricing clearly is reasonable enough to allow you to have a very fast growth in number of clients and global coverage. So I think that speaks for itself. I was wondering, maybe 2 more questions. We only have a few minutes left, and I also want to speak about the next steps for the GLIS. Karine, Geneva and Switzerland are both financial hubs that are trying to promote themselves on the sustainability front. And yet there are still a lot of financial institutions in Geneva and in Switzerland that haven't really gone through these certification processes, haven't adopted the relevant policies. So what could you share from your perspective and your experience at PICTE with these institutions that are still looking from the outside on whether or not to commit? What are the advantages? What are the risks for not doing so?
Listen, it's for each to define, but I can share our view at PICTE, where we had not in the past been very precise in looking at the topic, but we realized we couldn't do it just intuitively, as I was saying before. At one point, if you want to take things seriously, and if you commit to the topic of responsibility, right, which is the way we call sustainability too, then you need to look at it in a better way. It becomes a business strategy topic. So I think if you haven't understood the importance of not just gender, but inclusion and diversity as a responsibility, again, I really emphasize the fact that this is beyond all of the economic benefits that we've described and that are well known, that are publicized in the media. If this is the only reason, and there's no causality that is demonstrated anyway, it's still correlation, then you can spend a lot of time debating on that. I think there are more fundamental reasons, which is our responsibility towards communities and society, and you endorse that. Now the society is also moving. We're seeing exactly the same. It's part of the ESG topic. It's part of sustainability. It's part of the SDG. You can't just ignore it. You can choose to, but then society will ignore you. I think there's indeed a risk that you become very antiquated very quickly, it's just we've seen in investments. So it was maybe a game of few. It now becomes, it's just like a light ship. It can't be a bystander anymore. You can't say that it's a war happening between two foreign groups. If you're not part of the conversation, you're against. So you want to be part of it, make yourself part of the conversation. But I think it is for each franchise to define why they want to look at it, because it will define the leadership commitment. Probably. And I know that is a very satisfying answer, Tim. But we definitely, this exercise of, sharing our journey and sharing our framework, and having discussions and participating in panels as much as we can is part of the way we want to share the good news and say, come and join.
I think that's fantastic. And I really like your earlier statements, Karine, about, this certification process is about challenging yourself as an organization, about increasing your accountability first and foremost to your own staff, which in any organization is the first resource, and creating a benchmark for performance so that you can constantly improve yourself. I think these are very valid statements. My last question goes to Laila. The IFC, I believe, is a member of the 2X movement of development finance institutions trying to mobilize more capital for gender lens approaches. How do you see the EDGE as a tool in complement to your organization's commitment to 2X? And in general, are these competing standards or are they reinforcing standards? If you could just give us your perspective in a minute.
Sure. There's so many certifications in the market, and we don't see them as competing. We see them as complementing, because no certification body and no organization can cover the whole market. There's in every market we work in, we see a lot of demand for such certifications, and we work together as IFC with other organizations to try as much as possible to work together, to learn from each other, and to really meet that demand through different types of certifications. If IFC is working on EDGE with its clients, UNDP is working on something else, and the World Bank itself, our sister company, is also providing another type of certification. So we are all coordinating, we all work together towards the same goal at the end, and that's what matters. And not every certification is suitable for every company. So one company would go for a national level certification, another company is at the level to go for an EDGE certification, etc. So it depends really at which level as well the company is at.
That's super clear. Thank you so much. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour. So first I want to thank David, Laila, and Karine for their wonderful insights. Really very much appreciate you sharing your experience and your aspirations through EDGE. In terms of next steps, we have a GLIS webinar next week showcasing 3 very different strategies related to investment products for gender lens. You will see the invitations on our LinkedIn page as well as on the SFG website. We encourage you to register. And of course, there is the in-person gathering on the 30th of November in Geneva during Building Bridges Week. We hope to see many of you there. I think our room can accommodate up to 80 on-site participants. We're not used to it anymore after COVID, so we look forward to seeing you in person. And again, thanks all for your interest in gender lens approaches and for your attendance at this webinar.